As a landlord or property manager, one of the most significant challenges you may face is collecting rent from tenants who fail to pay on time. When rent payments are overdue, it can create financial stress and disrupt the management of your property. To tackle this issue, the first step you need to take is issuing a past due rent notice or late rent notice to recover late payments. In this video, we will provide you with all the information you need about this formal notice. We'll discuss the purpose of the notice, what it should include, and how to deliver it to your tenant. By the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of how to effectively use past due rent notices or late rent notices to recover overdue rent and fees. So, without further ado, let's get started. What is a late rent notice? A past due rent notice, also known as a late rent notice, informs tenants that their rent payments are past due. It serves as a reminder of the tenant's need to pay rent in addition to any late fees specified in the lease. Landlords would be wise to include a list of any extra fees the renter may be responsible for, such as parking or storage charges, as well as warning that legal action may be taken if rent is not paid by the due date. This document is generally issued to tenants who have only once been late for rent and a polite and official reminder. A notice to pay rent or vacate or an eviction notice to terminate the lease may be sent if the tenant continues to be late with the rent or is repeatedly delayed. In some cases, a tenant could refuse to pay rent if the landlord has broken the terms of the agreement or neglected to fix a significant problem within the property. Landlords are not permitted to impose any penalties or charge a late fee in such situation. What you'll need to include in a late rent notice. It's important to include certain details in your past due rent notice. Instead of drawing one up from scratch, you can use our free forms and late rent notice template, which can be found in the description below. Or you can use DoorLoop to create custom rental documents. Here's a summary of what you should include in your late rent notices. Issue date, the name of the tenant as it appears on the lease agreement, rental property address and the unit number if it applies, overdue amount, the late fee that applies as stipulated in the rental agreement, how the late rent payments can be made, the consequences of failing to make the rent payment, and the landlord or property manager's signature. Keep in mind that the late fee that applies will depend on the laws in effect in your state, so it's important to do your research. When should you send a late rent notice? Different state and local rental rules apply to the timing and mode of delivery of landlord's notice of late rent. Since email is typically not accepted as a delivery method, you might need to personally deliver the notice or send it via certified mail. It is vital to check your local laws before sending a letter because some jurisdictions permit landlords to send a rent due notice 5 days after the rent payment due date. How to send a late rent notice. Hint, look at the lease agreement. A late rent notice can be delivered in a number of ways. The following methods are typically used to issue a request for late rent payments: registered or certified mail, overnight courier delivery, and in-person delivery. Keep in mind that the lease agreement will specify the method you will need to use to issue a late rent notice, so be sure to check the terms set in the contract before choosing a delivery method. Email is not considered an acceptable way to issue a late rent notice. Why use a past due rent notice? In many cases, sending a late rent notice is all that's needed to get a tenant to pay what they owe. Sometimes a tenant may have forgotten to pay rent, so sending them a late rent notice will remind them to pay overdue rent. Consequences of not sending a past due rent notice. If a landlord does not send a late rent notice, they could suffer the following consequences. You will lose time. Researching how to evict a tenant and pursuing overdue rent will cost precious time. Lost money. You will need to pay court fees and pay an attorney to begin eviction proceedings. Stress. Pursuing a tenant, having them live on your rental property for free, and filing an eviction lawsuit can cause lots of stress and frustration. So what are your next steps? If a tenant fails to pay rent after they are issued a past due rent notice, it may be time to send a pay or quit notice. In the event that the renter still refuses to make rent payments, the next step is following the eviction process. Let's take a closer look at these next steps. 3-day notice to pay or quit. In essence, a 3-day notice to pay or quit or rent demand is a more formal late rent notice. According to the contract, the renter has 3 days to pay rent, failure of which would lead to the tenant being evicted from the rental home. Some states demand that you give the renter a heads up via past due rent notice before sending them a 3 or 5 day pay or quit notice. In other states, landlords can simply provide a notice to pay or quit. If a pay or rent notice has been issued and the tenant still refuses to pay their late rent, the landlord can proceed with the eviction process through the court. The first step in this process is filing an eviction notice. Evicting a tenant means forcibly removing them due to the violation of the conditions of the lease or a failure to pay rent. Keep in mind that you cannot evict a tenant unless they have failed to pay rent for more than 30 days. On average, it takes 1 to 3 months to evict a tenant in the US. Be sure to check your state laws to ensure this, which can also be found on our website below. What is the best way to collect rent payments? Simplifying the rent collection process is one way to lower the probability of missed rent payments. Renters are less likely to be late with their payments if paying the rent is simple. You can use DoorLoop to set up payment notifications and receive rent payments with ease. DoorLoop even allows you to schedule reminders so your tenants know before the due date that they will need to pay their rent. Since all transactions are then automatically documented in our accounting software, the time required for you to keep track of income and cost each month is greatly reduced. We hope you found this video informative and helpful in understanding the importance of past due rent notices or late rent notices. Remember, these notices serve as a formal reminder to tenants who have not paid their rent on time, and it's crucial to follow the state laws and the lease agreement to ensure that you comply with all rules and regulations. If you're looking for an easy and effective way to create a past due rent notice or pay or quit notice, DoorLoop can help you generate rental documents in just minutes, thanks to a handy autofill feature. Alternatively, check out our free forms library, including our late rent notice template. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more helpful videos just like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.